You think the American story is founded on pilgrims and English law. You know about Jamestown and Plymouth Rock. But what if the fierce, anti-authoritarian spirit that fueled the American Revolution wasn't born in London, but in the ancient, battle-scarred highlands of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales? Prepare to look beyond the Mayflower and into the deep roots of American identity. The story begins in the first millennium BC, not in the refined halls of colonial Boston, but in the iron-willed tribes of ancient Europe. The Celts were not a single nation, but a vast network of fiercely independent tribes, the Gaels, the Britons, the Scots, united by a common language root, oral traditions, and a deep, ingrained distrust of centralized authority. They were defined by their constant, centuries-long conflict with the organized empires around them, first Rome, and later the powerful, centralizing English crown. The 2,000-year resistance, the seed of anti-authority. The core legacy the Celts carried into the American DNA was a 2,000-year history of political dissent. Their resistance was perpetual, deeply embedded in their cultural memory and passed down through generations. The initial Great Clash came against the Roman Empire. The famous revolt of Boudica in 60 AD against Roman rule in Britain set a foundational historical precedent. Boudica, a queen of the Iceni tribe, led a massive, decentralized uprising that sacked 3 major Roman settlements. Her narrative, the fierce local warrior fighting the colossal, disciplined imperial machine, became an enduring myth for generations who resisted Romanization. This cultural memory of the underdog fighting the empire, even when facing overwhelming odds, was a blueprint for future rebellions. Following the Roman withdrawal, the Celtic peoples continued their struggles for sovereignty against the encroaching Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and later against the unifying power of the English monarchy. For centuries, the clans of Scotland, the tribes of Ireland, and the resilient Welsh fought brutal wars to prevent annexation and centralized control. This generated a massive, sustained culture of anti-monarchy and distrust of central government, where the loyalty of the individual was reserved for the local clan chief or the tribe, not a distant king in London. By the 17th and 18th centuries, when massive waves of Scots-Irish, Ulster Scots, Highlanders, and Welsh moved to the American colonies, often fleeing poverty, land disputes, and political repression, they brought this potent cultural DNA with them. Their migration was often born out of economic necessity and the failure of political resistance in their homelands. These were not the wealthy, organized Puritans seeking to build a new theocracy. They were often refugees of violence and overtaxation, seeking true political and economic space. The frontier forge, the making of the independent American. The settlement patterns of these Celtic groups fundamentally defined the American character. They did not settle in the neat, established coastal cities of Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, which were already dominated by the established English gentry and Quaker populations. Instead, they moved immediately to the Appalachian Frontier, the very edge of civilization, where they could live without the shadow of English taxes, feudal lords, or distant authority. These settlers became the first true frontiersmen and women, carving out existence in the dense forests and rugged mountains. Their survival depended entirely on self-reliance, community loyalty, the clan mentality, and the ability to defend their isolated settlements. This legacy of the frontier existence seeped directly into American political thought. The Second Amendment, a cultural precedent. The Celts had no tradition of a feudal, disarmed peasantry. Their history demanded that the individual citizen, the clansman, be armed and ready for immediate self-defense against both hostile native tribes and the potential intrusion of colonial authorities. This cultural precedent that liberty depends on the armed individual was carried directly into the American political landscape, finding its ultimate expression in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. It was a practical, centuries-old necessity translated into law. Decentralized democracy. The clan structure they practiced, where loyalty was fiercely local and power was fluid, not strictly hereditary, translated into a profound suspicion of any central federal government. This distrust shaped the push for states' rights and small, accountable government that continues to define U.S. politics today. The system had to be structured to prevent the rise of a new king across the ocean. The language of rebellion. The political language that fueled the American Revolution, the fiery rhetoric of independence, self-sovereignty, and unyielding resistance, found a natural home in the cultural tradition of the Celts, who had been speaking that language for 1,000 years against English dominance. The Revolutionary Vanguard. When the Revolution finally erupted in 1775, the Celtic contribution was both decisive and disproportionate. The Appalachian line. The Scots-Irish, having settled in the Appalachian Mountains, formed the backbone of many early revolutionary militias. They fought with a ferocity born of centuries of clan warfare and border skirmishes, often having the highest participation rates in the Revolutionary Army. The famous Over-Mountain Men, who decisively defeated a loyalist force at the Battle of King's Mountain in 1780, were overwhelmingly of Scots-Irish and Celtic descent, proving that the frontier was the decisive battleground for American independence. The leaders. Key figures of the Revolution and early Republic had deep Celtic roots, carrying the legacy of the highlands and the bogs. Figures like Andrew Jackson, Scots-Irish, Patrick Henry, Scottish descent, and John Calhoun, Scots-Irish, embodied the unyielding, often volatile spirit of the frontier warrior. Even figures like Thomas Jefferson, who hailed from Virginia's established gentry, had ancestral lines that connected back to ancient Welsh families, linking him to the intellectual tradition of the Welsh Enlightenment. The Whiskey Rebellion. Their resistance didn't end with the defeat of the British. The Whiskey Rebellion, 1791 to 1794, a massive anti-tax revolt, was primarily fueled by Scots-Irish settlers in western Pennsylvania, who refused to acknowledge the taxation authority of the distant new federal government in Philadelphia. It was a direct replay of the same anti-tax, anti-lord mentality they had carried from Europe, this time directed at Alexander Hamilton's centralized vision. This event forced the new U.S. government to define its authority over the fiercely independent frontier. The enduring legacy, the soul of American independence. For the U.S. audience today, the Celtic narrative offers a profound reinterpretation of who Americans are. It moves the foundational story beyond the often cited Puritan and strictly English narratives, introducing a layer of fierce, passionate, and often wilder ancient heritage. The Celtic fire that burned in the ancient hills of Europe crossed the ocean to the American frontier, where it forged the very spirit of liberty and dissent that continues to define the nation. It is a lineage of constant struggle, fierce loyalty, and unyielding independence, a memory that is still very much alive in the American soul, explaining the deep, almost reflexive American instinct towards self-reliance, gun ownership, and skepticism of government, traits rooted in ancient clan survival strategies, not merely post-Enlightenment philosophy. The story of the Celts in America is the ultimate proof that history moves in circles, and the core of American independence was built not just on the ideas of Locke and Montesquieu, but on the ancient, unyielding spirit of warriors who refused to bow to an empire for 2 millennia.